When composing close passage analysis, you're always really looking out for the same things. You want to be able to comment on characters and relationships, the setting and the atmosphere, themes and ideas. And just below on this screen now, you can see some of the things that we can be looking out for. So diction is about the word choice, formal or informal register, colloquial language. Well, in this passage, which is part three, from part 3 of Mice and Men, written by John Steinbeck, we're going to see lots of colloquial language being used as he is describing the world from the perspective of the migrant farmers. But it's all about how does a writer convey certain ideas, and the writer's tools are words. So we need to be able to identify and discuss the role of adjectives, adverbs, verbs, prepositional phrases, any figurative language devices, similes, metaphors, personification. There's an acronym, STEAL, that I use for characterization. Speech, what they say is important. The thoughts, the effects a character has on another. Their actions, and what they look like. Setting we can define as the time and the place, the culture, the objects which help depict the time and place and culture, religion as well if it exists. We can talk about the atmosphere as well. Atmosphere, you can use a range of emotional words. So is it joyful, sorrowful, melancholy, quiet, reflective, suspenseful, violent, angry, explosive. So we could talk about the development of the rising dramatic tension within a passage. Now, if we were to look at a play, we would also comment on the writer's use of stage directions, dialogue, the costumes, the set design, the props, all of which contain symbolic meaning. So let's take a look at this passage from part 3. And what I'm going to do is give you a recording of this with annotations along the way. I'm going to try and color code it as well. In this passage, beginning, Lenny looked helplessly at George. This is the beginning of the fight between Curly and Lenny, where Lenny ends up crushing Curly's hand. If you would like, you can take a moment to pause this recording while you read and review the passage, and then I can guide you through it. Okay, so it's a 44-line passage, and it goes from, as I said, the first line, Lenny looked hopelessly at George, Slim intercedes and makes Curly promise that he won't tell the boss what happened, that Lenny actually crushed Curly's hand. He makes him blame it on a farming machinery accident. Now, whenever you're given a close passage, if you've got a guiding question or two to help you, really worthwhile you using those to focus in. So what does Steinbeck's use of diction tell you about the characters and relationships? So I'm going to have to look very closely at word choice here and see how the characters are in themselves, how they are depicted by Steinbeck, and what they think and feel about each other. Also, I'm going to comment on the themes of power and inequality within the text. Well, looking at this, there are 3 main characters. That's easy for me to do some annotation. We've got Slim, we've got Curly, but we begin with Lenny. So I'm looking at how Steinbeck reflects on the theme of power and inequality in relation to the character of Lenny. So let's begin by color coding him with green. Let's think about Curly, color coding him with yellow, and Slim, I'm going to color code with pink. What this will do is allow me to see the patterns as they emerge. And so when I'm looking to put my ideas into a logical, coherent outline, I'll be able to group those ideas and I'll see it very visually on the page if I colour code. Well, look at this first line. Lenny looked hopelessly at George, and then he got up and tried to retreat. Well, here I want to look at Lenny looked helplessly and tried to retreat. So Lenny's body language here is very, very defensive. He doesn't want the fight at all. And that is contrasted with Curly. Curly was balanced and poised. Now Curly, we know, actually is a prize fighter. If you know that Lenny throughout the novel is animalistic, he is bear-like, he is awkward, he is clumsy, the contrast of his helpless mannerisms are very pronounced when you see Curly's presentation coming immediately afterwards. So Curly being balanced and poised, this is a boxer's stance, and it's aggressive. And that is typical of Curly. Whenever he's characterized, he's introduced with his fists clenching, his elbows tensing, ready to put himself in a fighting position. Now, if we have a look here at these violent verbs, he slashed at Lenny with his left and then smashed down with his nose. So we see the use of violent verbs there. Lenny gave a cry of terror. So throughout this passage, Lenny is trying to get out of it and he is being beaten up and bullied. I know that he is mentally weak, and the dialogue supports that. He looks again to George, who is always his protector, for direction, but also make him let me alone, George. That is, okay, it's in the vernacular of the southwest United States of California, but also it's grammatically incorrect. In standard English, you would say, George, please get him to leave me alone, or make him leave me alone, George. But make him let me alone is grammatically incorrect. It's a sign, the language, what he speaks, is a sign of his mental fragility. So the reader feels more sympathy for Lenny here. Defensive body language again. He backed until he was against the wall. Curly followed, slugging him in the face. So again, repetition of violent verbs. Now, I've chosen to look in this passage at Lenny and Curly because the fight is between them, and not talk so much about George. But of course, George and Lenny travel together. They are dependent on each other. They are big friends. So I am going to keep track of what George is saying. Maybe I can choose a different colour for George. Let's go for a light blue. Get him, Lenny. Don't let him do it. He's on his feet yelling. So George, we could say, wants to protect Lenny. He is encouraging him to fight. But Lenny here covers his face with his huge paws and bleated with terror. Well, huge paws, that's like a bear, and bleated is animalistic noise, like a sheep. So here, Steinbeck presents Lenny as animalistic to show his mental weakness in the face of of Curly's violence. Make him stop. So again, we've got this repetition. That's not happened once, it's happened a few times now. Make him stop, George. And then what we can see with Lenny, he's got this clumsy, oafish, animalistic description, Everything that Curly is doing in the first exchanges are short and direct and precise and violent. So we can see that he's a really efficient fighter. Curly is deadly. His efficiency at fighting is reflected through the short, compact sentences. Whenever you talk about sentence structure, you're talking about syntax that Steinbeck employs. We just need to make sure, as we go through, that we recognize that these characters are works of fiction. They are fictional inventions of the author, and it is the author who is doing everything to make us think about who has the power. And in the opening exchanges, it is Curly who has the power.